Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mariah. I'm a rotational physiotherapist in the UK, and here on my channel I post things physiotherapy and lifestyle related. So if you're interested in that, subscribe, notification bell, all so you never miss a video. If you want to become a physio like myself in the UK, there are different paths that you can take. It's not always the path that you think you have to take to get into the course. So I'll just give you a quick rundown of the different paths. So you have your traditional path, which is you're doing an undergrad or you do a pre-reg. So you do your BSc, then boom, become a physio. You do, obviously there's other steps in between, but like you do your BSc or you do an MSc. And now well, these were around before, but they're a bit more frequent, doing apprenticeships. And you've got some MSCIs. So those are masters as well. So you've got different paths that you can take into things. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about like the duration of those paths and like some of the pros and cons to taking those options versus other options. If you want a bit more detail, there's loads of resources out there, and if there's anything that I can help you with in terms of answering questions, I'm happy to do so in the comments below. Anyway, so boom. So we're starting with BSc. So BSc course, most BSc courses now run like 3 years. They run for 3 years. Some of them are running for 4, but we'll get onto that. So traditionally they run for 3 years. You do these from, let's say you come straight out of A levels, you can go straight into a BSc. You do it at that level. And then after the 3 years, fingers crossed, you pass everything, then you're eligible to apply for the HCPC. Now, the pros of doing a BSc is because of the duration of the course, it gives you a bit more time to cement your knowledge before you end in the workplace. The amount of hours that you have to gather to be eligible to register for HCPC is still the same no matter what course and what option you take. So that's not something you have to worry about. But I think a big factor for people is, one, if you've just come out of sixth form college, then that option makes sense. If let's say you did a completely different degree, but now you want to study this and you're not eligible for the MSc, then going for a BSc makes sense as well. So there's loads of different options in that sense, as to why you may go for a BSc versus one of the other options. And then the good thing about a BSc that other people have told me, not just that you get a bit more time and everything, is that well, one, with the time, adding on from that, some people have said like having the course run a little longer than, let's say, my master's, which was 2 years long, it gives people a bit more time to really think, okay, like when I come out of it, do I want to be a rotational physiotherapist like myself, or do I already know what specialty I want to go into? It's more, they feel like they get a bit more time to process things in that sense, and decide what's best for them. So it's really an individual choice. Moving on to the masters, since I've mentioned it. So I did the MSc pre-reg. So my undergrad was in sports science, and I went on to do the masters physiotherapy with the pre-reg option because I obviously didn't have the registration of a physiotherapist before. So that's what made me eligible for the course, plus obviously my sports science degree, because it's a relatable course. If I had done something completely unrelatable, I probably would have gone for the BSc option. But with the MSc, the perks are it's 2 years long. If you were like myself who did an undergrad that lasted 4 years long, you don't then want to go back to uni and do 3 years. Well, I didn't. I was like, I'm not doing that. It could be financial reasons. It could just be time reasons. For me, it was time. I was like, I'm not. It's not even up for discussion in that sense. So being a faster pace could either be a pro or a con. The reason having a faster pace is a bit of a con. You feel like a lot of the information is kind of it's just thrown at you, and it's kind of like, cool, process this, process this, process this. And I find in your undergrad, I'm not saying you don't get support in your masters, because you do get support, but obviously you're expected to think at a higher level. You're expected to be either more independent than you were in your undergrad. Support is there and available, but it's kind of more like this is your thing, more autonomy with the masters. So if that's something you're interested in, I would say then go for that. I found that with the masters, compared to some of my colleagues who went through BSc, I had less hands-on time outside of placement. So I'm talking like your practical lessons. I had less of those, less chances to cement my knowledge, in terms of like my palpation, my like tactile skills, in the classroom before I went to the real world kind of thing, like the NHS side of stuff. So that was a bit of an interesting kind of struggling jump, I found for myself personally. Another reason why people may not go for the masters is obviously costs. Sometimes it really depends. So the previous course at the time when I went for it, I was eligible for the undergrad funding via Student Finance England, but that's not always the case for some of these masters. Some of them are not eligible for that, and then you obviously have to pay. With a master's loan, which you can get, or you can obviously pay out of pocket, but the master's loan is less flexible in terms of it's meant to be for tuition and maintenance, not a separate one for tuition and then a separate one for maintenance. So that's one of the things you have to consider. Is like really, yeah. Also, another thing of mirroring those two courses, the BSc course typically takes on a lot more, like a bigger cohort. There's usually like, I don't know, let's say 100 or 80 or something students that they take on each cohort in a BSc. But in a master's, I mean, mine I felt like was an exception because mine took on 60 people. But most master's courses I've heard of only really take on like 20, 25 people and have it more of a close-knit type of group. Which sometimes I think maybe I would have preferred, like having a little smaller group, but then at the same time, having a big group means you always find someone who you will click with in a bigger group. So that's something to think about. Now, moving on to these other two options. So you have the MSCI. So far, I believe Birmingham, I went to Birmingham, by the way, for my master's. And that's one of the only unis, I think, or the only uni that I'm aware of that does the MSCI. So instead of offering just the BSc, like the simple BSc, they've decided to make the BSc 4 years long and turn it into an MSCI. And what that means is a Master of Science. So instead of coming out of those 4 years with an undergrad degree, you'll come out with a master's degree. Now, I think that could be very appealing for people. Some people want a master's level of education, and this could be a good way of doing it as well. I think, yeah, it's one of the things that you have to really think about, because at the end of the day, I think a misconception that some people get is that, like, if you did a master's versus doing an undergrad, somehow you're more likely to get, let's say, jobs, or more likely to be noticed because you have a master's. That I wouldn't say. I'm speaking from the NHS perspective. That's not the case. Like, it doesn't matter whether I did a master's or whether you did an undergrad or you did an apprenticeship. We're still on an equal playing field. I think that's not always understood. Also, if you do a BSc, you don't have to do a master's. Like, you don't have to do a master's. I've had a few people ask me that question. But with MSCI, obviously, you get the perks of getting an undergrad and a master's rolled into one. So it's like, ooh, tick, tick, lovely, and don't have to go back to uni. So, boom, that's a pro. A con, as I said, is like, is it really needed? Like, I don't really get the appeal, in my opinion. For it, I don't see the massive need to have to take that route. But each to their own, I suppose. And one appeal could be like going into more depth with the certain things, and because you have more time, or even, I don't know at what year they start going into more of a master's level. I don't know whether it's like BSc level for the first 3 years, and then last year is master's level stuff. Depending on how the course is structured, I think will depend on whether I think it will appeal to a lot of people. But I haven't heard a ton of bad things, so that's that's good. In that sense, so that's pretty good. With the apprenticeship as well. Now, apprenticeships are harder to come by because typically I haven't seen any apprenticeships offered outside of a trust. So I know a few people who I've looked into apprenticeships, and I know people who have gone for apprenticeships and are like successfully starting or on apprenticeships, and they're typically offered through a trust, from what I've noticed. And from the research I've been trying to do, it's been literally people, the apprenticeship comes up via the trust, and the trust works with the university, and the person spends time working in the trust, getting paid, but also spends a day or two at a university gaining the degree side of things. So now that, I think that option, I wish it was more widely available and widely known. Obviously, it depends on funding and everything. But I think a good thing about that option versus the other options where you have to go through uni full time is it's more appealing to people, especially if like you want to switch your career later on in life. But obviously, you've got kids, you've got mortgage, you've got car, or you got whatever you got to pay for. Taking that financial 3 year, 4 year hit isn't an option for everybody. So having an apprenticeship is an option for you to still, one, you get them skills, handling skills, working in the place you worked with. Is less change, let's say, because you're still working with your colleagues, but you're still getting that uni experience. You'll still come out with a degree. And I believe, I don't think it's like how it used to be, because I know when I looked into it at one point, it was like if a trust sponsors you, you have to have a job with them. Like you have to stay working with them once you finish, for about a year or something. But then I think they're a bit more flexible about that now. Yeah, they're a bit more flexible about that now. But basically, you've got yourself open for a job opportunity when you finish. Like, you don't have to do the stress of, okay, I need to finish uni, and then after, I'm getting towards the end and I'm focusing on my dissertation, and I also have to focus on putting in personal state, like supporting evidence to apply for jobs and attending interviews. It's kind of like, there you go, lovely, let me know when your pins come through, but there you go. So I think that's a good perk for people. They're very competitive though, and as I said, because of the funding and everything, they're very competitive. Sometimes you may see like only 2 people get accepted to it, but like 5 or something people may go for it. It's like, it's harder to come by. I think if it's something you're interested in, I would say try and get a job in a trust already. Like just be working in a trust as like a support worker or something along those lines. And then maybe even in your interview, mention the fact that you're interested in being a physio, or if you're not interested in being a physio, just any other therapist. And then see if they have any connections for apprenticeships and stuff like that, or even local unis. Ask them like, hi, do you offer a preceptorship program? No, why do I keep saying preceptorship? Apprenticeship program, and see if that's something they offer, because then that could be something that you could look into and see what you're interested in. But those are the different ways. Well, yeah, the different ways that you can become a physiotherapist in the UK. It's really each to their own, the approach that you choose to take. No approach is right and none is necessarily wrong. Like I said, it's very individual basis, and it brings you to a great career. I know I'm very NHS biased because I don't work in the private sector and I don't really know much about the private sector, and there may be someone who's saying that actually it really matters what you go for if you're in the private sector. So be mindful of that. But and before, I have a feeling someone's going to ask this, but I don't know how these translate from international, like if you've done your degree elsewhere, how these translate over to your eligibility to either apply for, let's say, a master's course or whatnot. But from my understanding, if you've done a BSc abroad and you want to be a physio in the UK, I don't believe it's compulsory that you have to do a master's. I've had a few people ask me that. I don't believe that's the case. But obviously look into that. Don't just take my word for it. This is just what I'm aware of. But anyway, I'll catch you guys in the next video, and see you.